Hello, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to talk about the 1974 sci-fi fantasy film Zardoz. You can kind of see the poster right there. This is, I also have, this is John Kenneth Muir's History of Science Fiction Movies in the 70s, and on the cover is a frame from Zardoz as well. So, kind of get the picture. So, I feel like this is a movie that could really only come from 1974. It's, I think if you showed this to modern audiences, it would be a hard sell. And maybe I'll talk more about that at the end of the video. But this could only come from 1974. This was directed by John Boorman, who had made Point Blank, the great neo noir. He had made Deliverance, right before this movie. Really, really incredible British director around this era, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. I often group John Boorman with Nicholas Roeg and Ken Russell, these three British directors who were, all of them worked in science fiction a little bit, but were making these really bold, audacious, confrontational movies during this time period, and Zardoz is certainly no exception to that as all. This movie starred Sean Connery, coming right off of his his last stint as James Bond in Diamonds Are Forever. Of course, he would come back in the 80s, but in Never Say Never Again. But this was Connery. If you've not seen the costume Connery wears in this movie, I would just say Google it. People know the costume, and it was an interesting choice for Connery to make, and a really bold choice for him to do as an actor to take on this film. So, yeah, as I said, only in 1974, and I think one of the things that makes the 70s unique, where 50s science fiction movies are, I think, still play well today in the 2020s, despite how dated they are. But you get into the 70s, and I think you show them to modern audiences, they're going to be like, what am I watching? What is this? And even 80s and 90s sci-fi is a little more grounded. But we get this period in the 70s where writers, directors, actors are really taking some bold chances with the types of movies they're making. So, just to give a little setup to the plot for this movie, and there's a lot happening in this movie. There's a lot of themes introduced, a lot of ideas in this movie, and I probably won't even come close to talking about all of them. But the film is set in the year 2293, so hundreds of years into the future, and we have two groups of people. We have the Brutals, who are these mostly masculine men's society, that are hunters. They live in the wilderness. They live a very savage life, a life of violence and things like that. And then you have the Eternals, who are this more futuristic group of people who, they're immortals. They have psychokinetic powers. There seems to not be a lot of gender division in their culture. You could argue it's more of a feminized culture with the Eternals, and they kind of control what the Brutals are up to. And that's where the term Zardoz comes in, which is this god that the Brutals worship, which was created by the Eternals to keep the Brutals in line. So the whole theme of religion as a form of social control, and that's the opening scene in the movie where this giant floating head appears to the Brutals and kind of gives them a little bit of a sermon of what they should do and things like that. So it's clearly a lot of commentary about religion in this movie and how it's used. and things like that. But the Sean Connery character Zed, through a series of events, discovers that Zardoz is a false god, and that there's really nothing to it, and the title of the movie Zardoz is taken from Wizard of Oz, and the idea of the Wizard of Oz and the man behind the curtain and all that type of thing. So Zed discovers that this whole religion has been this illusion that he's been living under, but he also becomes enlightened himself in some ways, and eventually goes into the culture of the Eternals, where the Eternal, it's a more of a communal culture. They have technology, even what almost looks like magic at times, with the way they're able to communicate with each other, and the fact that they don't age either, and that's a big theme too, where they begin to look at immortality as a curse. Like there's this one group, the people who don't really care, the indifferent ones. Yeah, that's not the indifferent ones, but the apathetics, who basically live as sort of, they're almost like completely catatonic states, because they're so tired of living, and they can punish each other, they can like age each other, so and things like that. And you have people who are, so it's a very strange functioning society where they have immortality, they have high technology, and they have a lot of these things happening here. And when Zed comes into their culture, he's looked upon as a curiosity, a mutant, but in time becomes someone almost like a liberator of this culture, as like the whole chosen one idea of a, almost like comparisons to Dune, like the Paul Atreides idea of the messianic character who will lead culture into the next stage and things like that. Yeah. So, like I said, a lot of ideas, and if you start talking about the plot of this movie, it starts to not make. You can start to sound a little insane yourself if you start describing the plot of it. But it's just that type of movie. There's a lot of commentary about violence in the movie, how easy it is to make people commit violence, and once again back to the idea of social control and ideas like that. There's a lot in the movie about gender as well, which I kind of touched upon a little bit, where I know some view this film as almost a critique of the counterculture, or even a critique of feminism. I don't know if I hold to that idea of kind of saying, well, it's also a critique of masculinity in some ways as well. So I don't know if it's kind of taking a centrist position on gender and things like that, but I guess we're just kind of confronted with these, on the one side, a hyper masculine society and a hyper feminine society, and and how does that work out? So with all the discourse today on gender, this movie would be an interesting to see what people would take from it. So, but there's also like the whole 70s, like new age spirituality is also in this movie as well, where the Eternals, like, they dabble in crystals and psychokinesis, and their communal ways of living are kind of like hippie-ish type ways. It's almost like a future. I kind of compare this to Dune in some ways, where it's almost a future of like a medieval, very hierarchical future, where there's clear spaces of control and things like that. So it is interesting in that way too, what the film is saying about social hierarchies and things like that. I think the film also draws a lot upon like classic science fiction too, even to kind of go back to the Time Machine, where in the Time Machine, the H.G. Wells novel in the film, where you have the the beastly Morlocks and the more the very sheepish Eloi, and they kind of have this. Only in that situation, it's the Morlocks who are the beast are in control, and this in Zardoz, it's the beast who are kind of kept under control by the more passive society. So yeah, so the film draws a lot about science fiction and things like that. I should say the look of the film is really impressive. Boorman filmed this all on location in Ireland, and that adds a lot to it. The cinematographer was Jeffrey Unsworth, who shot the Superman 78, shot a lot of really good films, so it's really good cinematography. The color is really striking in Zardoz as well, so it's an incredibly looking film. The costumes, I believe John Boorman's wife did the costumes, and just you're going to see a lot of really interesting costumes throughout this movie and look of it in that way as well. So I was reading different articles online of Zardoz, and one article looked at this as an Irish movie, and this should be a movie that people watch on St. Patrick's Day because there is something Irish about it. A lot of the actors and extras were Irish, and the whole fantastical side to it, but with all what the film is saying about gender and sexuality and social structures and things like that. So there's a lot of memorable scenes in the movie too that really are that come out to you. Like I mentioned, the floating head and yeah, so the memorable scenes throughout. And I was, as I watched this movie too, I was thinking about today. I don't know if there's a space sometimes for filmmakers to make something like this that's very audacious and very bold. I mean, where maybe like with indie movies that's more low budget, you might get something like this. It seems like with mainstream science fiction, like Christopher Nolan can do out there ideas, but they're not necessarily challenging. Christopher Nolan, like, I'm a fan of Christopher Nolan. I like his movies, but his movies are all about looking cool and kind of not really. They're very technologically driven. A lot of his movies, and whereas the Boorman films are very much about humanity and human relationships and the messiness of relationships. So yeah, I like I said, the 70s was an interesting time where we get movies like this that are really provocative and really pushing the envelope as far as as far as the sci-fi genre goes. So yeah, that's some of my thoughts on Zardoz. Like I said, it's a movie you kind of just have to watch and just kind of get your take on it. And I've not been able to hear the commentary from Boorman, which I've heard is quite good, and he's even critical at some points in the film. But yeah, there's a lot to offer in this movie if you want something really unique, really 1970s, and trying to navigate what the film is trying to say about many things. It's it's definitely worth watching. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Zardoz. So thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.